My name is Catherine, and I'm 45, though sometimes, looking at myself in the mirror in the morning, I feel both older and younger at the same time, a strange sensation, as if time itself hasn't decided whose side it's on. I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of Portland, where the evenings smell of damp earth and pine needles, and silence fills the rooms like a thick fog. 5 years ago, I got divorced, and it wasn't a messy, destructive divorce, just that quiet, cool breakup. When two people suddenly realize they're no longer moving in the same direction, that conversations have become short and the silence is too long, we divided everything fairly, like adults, without scenes or recriminations, and went our separate ways. He remarried 2 years ago, moved to California, and to my surprise, I was actually happy for him. The only thing I've never been able to let go of is the pain of never having become a mother. We tried for years, underwent tests and procedures. Hoped and believed, but nothing worked. After the divorce, I resigned myself to it, or at least tried to convince myself I had. Instead, I focused on what I had left: my house, my books, my walks along the waterfront, and a quiet sense of gratitude for being alive at all. I still had my family, my mom and dad, both in their 70s, but cheerful, energetic, always on the go, and my younger sister, Kelly, my childhood sweetheart, sunny and lucky, for whom everything always seemed to unfold smoothly, as if the world unfolded before her like a trail of gold coins. She's 38 and has 2 children, Emma, 14, smart and caustic, and Tyler, a 10-year-old human hurricane. After the divorce, I was left with a decent amount of money, not a fortune, but enough to take the worry out of paychecks and bills. My ex-husband and I worked hard, saved wisely, and now the interest from my investments allowed me to live a peaceful life, without need or hassle. Sometimes I traveled, sometimes I helped at the food bank, sometimes I just strolled around the city and observed people, donating to organizations I believed in. I tried to be a good daughter and aunt, helping when one of them needed something. A few years ago, Kelly and her husband decided to buy a house and didn't have enough money for a down payment. I didn't hesitate. I simply transferred them $40,000 from my savings. They thanked me and swore they would pay me back, although I didn't insist. I thought then that's what family is, helping without expecting anything in return. That Saturday, late summer, Kelly was hosting a family barbecue in the backyard of their cozy home, the very one for which I had once paid part of their happiness. That morning, I baked a homemade peach pie, my signature one, with cinnamon and brown sugar, which always filled the kitchen with the scent of childhood. I arrived around 2, parked outside, and walked out holding the pie, careful not to burn my fingers on the hot pan. The back gate was closed, but beyond it I could hear voices, laughter, and the clatter of dishes. I was about to reach for the gate when I heard Kelly's voice. "Where's Catherine?" she asked. Someone answered, but the words were drowned out by the general hubbub. Then Kelly laughed, lightly, ringingly, the way she always laughed when she wanted to impress. "I hope she gets into an accident and doesn't come back." And then everyone laughed. For a second, my brain refused to process it. It couldn't be happening, but the laughter was real, thick, alive, familiar. I made out my mother's chuckle, my father's muffled laughter, even Mark, Kelly's husband, and the children's voices. I stood there, the pie in my hands, rooted to the ground. My heart was pounding in my throat, my hands were shaking. I thought about leaving, just turning around, going home, throwing out the damn pie, and going to bed, but I didn't. I opened the gate and walked in as if nothing had happened, as if the words I'd just heard hadn't left a crack in my chest. No one smiled, no one came over and said, "Oh, Catherine, you're here." Nothing. They just glanced at me and continued their conversations. This wasn't the first time. I'd known something had been wrong between us for the past few years, but I kept telling myself I was exaggerating, that I'd simply become oversensitive. I walked over to the table, set the pie down next to the plates, straightened the tablecloth to keep my hands occupied, and walked over to the far corner where the folding chair stood. I sat down, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely out of place, in my own family. My parents sat across the yard, holding hands and nodding at me as if it were a formal acknowledgement. "Yes, you're here," and that was it. No warm glance, no attempt to invite me to sit closer, no surprised joy, just a slight, almost businesslike nod of the head, and I suddenly felt as if I were in someone else's play, where years of care and help had been transformed into neatly folded props. Kelly and Mark stood by the grill, leaning against each other, talking as calmly as if I were the wind passing by, not a single glance, not a half-worded invitation to come closer. The children, Emma and Tyler, race across the lawn, laughing, hiding behind bushes, and running past. They didn't slow down, not noticing me, as if I were part of the lawn and not their aunt, who had brought a pie and spent the sleepless morning hours by the oven to treat them to her secret recipe. I sat there for 3 hours, I guess, otherwise the time somehow stretched. I ate nothing, only drank water, listened to the murmur of conversations, the crunch of paper on paper plates, someone telling a joke, and everyone laughing, and I watched, noting the slightest movements, trying to understand what had happened when 7 years of kindness and quiet support were summed up in a single phrase, a wish for something to happen to me. As the party began to fade and people began heading to their cars, I stood up and helped clean up, because I always do, because my understanding of family involves deeds as well as words. I stacked plastic plates, washed bowls, collected empty jars, threw away bags of paper napkins, and wiped up sticky messes on the table. And my hands were so full of familiar care that it felt like I was wiping away not just crumbs but also the awkward wall that had grown between us. But no one noticed, no one said thank you, no one came over and touched my hand. When everything was cleared away and the yard began to resemble a home again, I picked up the empty pie pan, and my heart, still somewhere near the stove, nearly sank into my heels from the harsh silence. The pie was gone, and not a single word of praise, not a single smile, not even a small comment about how delicious it was. I stood there, holding the empty pan, wishing someone would just say, "What a delicious pie," for that simple sound to fall over me like a soft blanket. But the silence was different, thick and even, like a film, and that made it even harder for me to breathe. I didn't say goodbye to anyone in particular, didn't seek an explanation from my parents, didn't demand an answer from my sister. I simply left, without making a fuss, without making a scene, because scenes were never in my nature. And when I got home, I immediately lay down without even changing, and lay there, staring at the ceiling, while my thoughts rolled one after another: hope, then ambivalence, then fearful anger, and finally bitterness. The phrase, "I hope she has an accident and doesn't come," twirled like a stinging leech for which I couldn't find the pincers. Everyone was laughing, and that laughter stood before me like a wall I suddenly didn't know how to climb. In the morning, I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, feeling the hot cup revive my fingers. I began to recount everything I'd done for my family over the years. 40,000 for Kelly's house. Did I understand back then that it was forever, or did I simply trust my daughter and her husband and want them to have a place where children could grow up without fear? 3,000 for Emma's braces, 1,500 for Tyler's computer, 20,000 for a new roof for my parents. Numbers, money orders, checks, they formed a long, tight chain, and the longer I thought about it, the clearer the picture became. I gave, didn't demand, helped, didn't count my debts, because for me, family wasn't just an accounting system, but the breath we shared with each other during difficult times. I remembered paying for Kelly's old car repairs, transferring money for unexpected medical bills, sending Christmas gifts, simply showing up at the right moment, and I imagined all those gestures suddenly becoming not a contribution to warmth but a mundane transaction, erasable with a caustic joke. I picked up the phone and called Rachel, a friend I'd met during my divorce, who had become more than just a lawyer I knew, but a strong, reasonable voice in situations where emotion obscured the paperwork. "Rachel, this is Catherine," I said, my voice so full of a plea for support that even a quiet answer on the other end of the line would have been warming. "Can I come to you?" I need advice, and Rachel, without delay, asked for all the papers, wills, powers of attorney, bank statements, anything that might shed light on the legal ties that connected me to the family. The next morning, I carefully gathered the folders, printouts, and notes, went to her office, and sitting across from her, I talked it all over, about the barbecue, about Kelly's words, about the years when I quietly and selflessly helped them. Rachel listened silently, leafed through the papers, and then said calmly, "The 40,000 you gave Kelly for the house was a gift. Is there a written agreement? A loan document? A receipt?" I admitted that I hadn't drawn up anything, that I had done what people always do with family. I trusted them. She shook her head, and there was no condemnation in her face, only the practical darkness of the law. legally, she said, you can't get that money back. It wasn't a loan, not a credit, but a gift without conditions. And, alas, that's how it's interpreted in our reality. It was as if a shock had struck me. 40,000 had vanished from my space, and it was painful, not just because of the amount, but because I had essentially lost a part of myself in the hope of helping. I'm afraid so, Rachel added, and then suggested a plan. But we can change your will and revoke the powers of attorney to prevent further transfers, and so that they can't get more from you without your consent. I sat for a minute, digesting the loss and simultaneously feeling a wave of relief wash over me at the thought that at least now I could set a limit. At least I could cut off the road to new and unnecessary spending, and that provided some, albeit small, but fundamental consolation, and at least I could keep her from taking more of the drug. Returning home that afternoon, I suddenly felt a strange relief, as if someone had finally turned a stuck mechanism inside me, and now the air was cleaner and my thoughts clearer. Yes, anger was still seething. It doesn't go away so quickly, especially when you realize that years of kindness and trust have cost you too much. But at least I'd done something concrete. I'd acted, not just sat there pondering other people's ridicule. I sat down at my desk, reached into the filing cabinet, and opened the top drawer. The folders, neatly labeled, lay in tight rows, and each one now seemed like a reminder of my former naivety. I shuffled through the papers, the will, the powers of attorney, the insurance forms, the contracts, even the bank statements, and the further I went, the more I felt as if someone else had infiltrated all my decisions, leaving their mark on every document. When I came across the first power of attorney, my heart sank. There, on every page, was the same name, Kelly. She was my trusted party, the person who, should anything happen to me, would have the right to make medical decisions on my behalf, manage my accounts, and access my investments. She was listed as the beneficiary on the insurance policy, and as the primary beneficiary in the will. My parents came next, then Kelly's children, Emma and Tyler. I sat and stared at it, and with each line a feeling of nausea rose up inside me, not physical, but emotional. It was like seeing the betrayal hidden in my own papers. These people, who a few days ago had laughed at my joke about how it would be better for me not to come, were about to receive everything I had ever earned, saved, and saved. It wasn't just offensive, it was mockingly ironic. The next morning, I returned to Rachel's office, clutching a thick folder overflowing with papers, and as soon as I walked in, I said bluntly, I want to revoke the power of attorney I gave Kelly, and I want to change my will. Rachel looked at me carefully, long and hard, like someone who doesn't rush to judgment but wants to be sure you're not acting rashly. Are you sure, Catherine? She asked calmly. I answered without hesitation, looking her straight in the eye. Absolutely sure. For the first time in a long time, I spoke those words not to someone else, but to myself. Okay, she said, who would you like to be your heirs? I considered this, clutching my pen, and quietly replied, I don't know yet. Maybe someone professional who can manage everything without personal interests, or a charity. The main thing is that neither of them will get anything. Rachel nodded, as if this answer was clear to her, and without further ado, she set to work. We sat there for several hours, and I watched her methodically and confidently cross Kelly out of the power of attorney, remove the names of my parents, Emma and Tyler, from the will, change the beneficiaries on the insurance policies, and add a temporary administrator in their place. I signed page after page, and with each stroke of the pen, I felt like I was cutting off another thorn, painful, but necessary. When everything was ready, Rachel carefully folded the documents, affixed the notary seals, and handed me the copies, saying, keep these in a safe place. I thanked her, and on the way home, I suddenly found myself walking lightly for the first time in a long time, my shoulders uncrossed, my breathing even, as if I'd finally taken control of a part of my life that hadn't been mine for too long. The first thing I did when I got home was call a locksmith. He arrived quickly, carrying a heavy toolbox and the smell of metal, and I watched him change the locks on the front door, the back door, and the attic, even though no one had been there. He made me several copies of the keys and, handing them over, asked, who else should I give these to? I smiled for the first time that day and replied, no one. The next day, I went to the bank. The spacious office smelled of coffee and furniture polish, and without waiting in line, I asked for Susan, the manager, whom I'd known for years. She came out to me, a neat, friendly woman with glasses, and asked what had happened. I need you to verify all authorized users of my accounts, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Susan sat down at the computer, quickly typed something, and said, "You have one authorized cardholder, your sister, Kelly." I clutched my bag and, without blinking, replied, "Cancel her access immediately, block the card, remove it from all my accounts, and reissue everything in my name only." She looked up at me, surprised but not overly curious. Apparently she'd encountered family history before. "Okay," she said. "Do you also want to change the security questions, username, and password?" I nodded. "Yes, that's it." The process took about an hour. New passwords, updated forms, signatures on every page. When I finally walked out of the bank, a blast of fresh air hit my face, and I paused for a second on the steps, feeling a lightness flow through me like a gentle current. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid, not of what someone would say, not of someone taking advantage of my trust. I felt alive. A few hours after I left the bank, my phone rang, and when I saw Kelly's name on the screen, I knew the conversation wouldn't be pleasant. I pressed accept and heard her voice, sharp, agitated, as if she'd just burst into a scream at someone else. "Catherine, what the hell is going on?" she blurted. "I tried to buy the kids' school supplies, and my card is blocked. And I can't access your online account." I listened calmly, surprisingly calm for someone who, not long ago, trembled at every reminder of her. "It's because I blocked your access," I said evenly, not even raising my voice. There was a silence on the line, short but noticeable. Like the breath before a storm. "Then, what? Why did you do that?" Her voice was high, and I could almost see her jaw twitching. I answered quietly but firmly, "Because I heard what you said at the barbecue." Her breathing changed, became harsher. "What are you talking about?" she said, almost whispering, as if suddenly startled. "I heard you, Kelly, how you said you hoped I'd get into an accident and not come, and I heard everyone laugh, you, your kids, our parents." For a few seconds, there was no sound, then she chuckled nervously. "That's funny, you must have misheard." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because laughter was the only thing that could keep me from screaming. "I'm not deaf. Kelly, I heard you all perfectly well, and I heard you laughing." "You're exaggerating," she said, now irritated, as if it were me, not her, who was destroying the family peace. "No," I replied, "I'm not exaggerating." For a second, I even felt a slight warmth rise in my chest, that feeling of strength when you stop making excuses. "I won't be your ATM anymore, Kelly, don't call me again." And I hung up. My hands were shaking slightly, but it was the tremor of release, not fear. About half an hour later, the phone rang again, then again, first my parents, then Mark, her husband. I didn't answer. Then the messages came pouring in, dozens, one after another, all with the same complaint, as if they'd all agreed in advance who would say what. Mom wrote that I was being unreasonable, as if I was 18 again and causing a scene over a guy. Dad wrote that I was overreacting, as if the betrayal was just an emotional trifle. Mark added that I should calm down and think about the kids, and that made me feel especially sick because he always spoke condescendingly, with that special masculine tone that makes any woman feel small and wrong. I didn't reply to a single message. I simply turned off the sound, placed the phone face down, and sat looking out the window at the garden, where the wind ruffled the old rose bushes, the very ones I'd once planted with Kelly, laughing, soiling my hands. Now that laughter sounded alien. The next day, I had an appointment with the real estate lawyer Rachel had recommended, a man named David Thompson, tall, neat, with slightly graying hair at the temples and a voice that immediately inspired trust. I brought a whole folder of documents with me, the deed, tax returns, repair bills, every last piece of paper, because I wanted to leave no loopholes. "I want to put my house in a trust," I said when he invited us to sit. "I don't want anyone in my family to have access to it, now or after I die." He nodded, unsurprised, like a man who had heard it all. "A living trust is fine," he said, leafing through my papers. "You will be the trustee and beneficiary as long as you live. After you die, the house can be given to anyone." I glanced out the window, where light streamed through the blinds, streaking across the table. "I don't want it to go to just anyone. I want it sold and the proceeds donated to charity." David raised his eyebrows momentarily but said nothing, simply making a note in his notes. "Okay. And I assume you want to remove your sister from the list of beneficiaries associated with this." Property? He clarified. Yes, I replied, exclude her from everything. We spent almost 2 hours there, going over every line, refining the wording, signing papers. I felt like a surgeon finally cutting out something rotten and dangerous, not out of revenge, but for survival. When everything was ready, David gathered the documents, carefully folded them into a brown folder, and handed them to me. This is your trust package, keep it in a safe place, he said. I thanked him, went outside, and breathed in the cool air. My soul felt quiet, almost light, a strange sensation when you lose something, but at the same time, for the first time, you feel like you're finding yourself. When I returned home, I had barely crossed the threshold when I heard a car pull up in the driveway. I looked out the window and saw Kelly and Mark. They walked out almost in sync, like two people storming the door. They approached the door and knocked. I didn't move. Kelly knocked again, louder, more insistently. Catherine, open the door. We need to talk. I was silent, then I heard something clank, metal on metal, a familiar sound. She was trying to insert the old key. What the hell, she muttered, and I heard her turn the key again. She changed the locks, she said loudly, almost in disbelief. Then there was another bang on the door, this time with a fist. Catherine, I know you're in there. Open the door right now. I went into the living room, turned on the TV, turned up the volume, and settled into a chair. Crossing my arms, on the screen, someone was roasting chicken with rosemary, and the host laughed in a soft, soothing voice. Outside, Kelly was screaming my name, demanding an explanation, knocking harder, but I didn't go to the door. I just sat and watched the chicken's skin turn golden on the screen and listened to their footsteps fade outside. Eventually, they gave up and left. A few days later, when I'd begun to get used to the silence and almost believed that all those calls and knocks were finally behind me, the phone rang from an unknown number. I wasn't about to answer. My heart sank unpleasantly, as if warning me that nothing good would come from this call. But something inside me, perhaps curiosity, or perhaps some invisible thread that still connected me to my family, made me pick it up. Aunt Catherine? I heard a young, trembling voice. It was Emma. For a second, I was confused, not expecting either of them to dare call. Hi, Emma, I said calmly, though my insides were churning. What's going on? She asked. Mom and Dad keep saying you've gone crazy and don't talk to them anymore. What happened? I took a deep breath, looking out the window where sparrows swayed lazily in the branches, and said, remember what your mom said at the barbecue? There was a pause on the line, so long I thought Emma had hung up. Then she quietly replied, you mean when she said she hoped you were in an accident? Yes, I said, that's exactly it. Emma fell silent again. I remember, she finally said, and I laughed too, but I didn't think it was serious, it was just a joke. I closed my eyes. For me, it wasn't a joke, Emma. For me, it was the moment I realized what my family really thought of me, and I decided I wouldn't help people who wanted me dead. There was a quiet sigh on the other end of the line. I'm so sorry, Aunt Catherine, Emma said, her voice quiet, almost childish. I didn't mean to hurt you. I really am. I listened to her and thought that she was only 14, and that maybe she was just laughing because everyone laughed, because teenagers don't understand how much words can sometimes hurt. Come see me tomorrow, I said, we need to talk. Emma came the next day. She stood by the door, shifting from foot to foot, holding her backpack in front of her as if it could protect her. I opened the door and said, come in. We sat in the living room, and she kept looking down at her hands, fiddling with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. I'm so sorry, Aunt Catherine, she repeated. I know I said this on the phone already, but I mean it. I shouldn't have laughed. It was mean. I nodded. Yes, it was mean, but you're 14, you didn't think about what it meant, but your mother is a grown woman, and she should know better. Emma looked up and nodded. I know, she said quietly, but I'm still sorry. I looked at her. Those eyes held neither hypocrisy nor justification, but genuine guilt, and I suddenly felt both hurt and tender. I still love you, Emma, I said, but I'm not ready to forgive you. Not yet, I need time. Emma nodded, a shadow of sadness crossing her face. I'll wait as long as you need, she said. We sat for a while longer. We talked about school, her friends, and how she wanted to go to college to study graphic design, and for a brief moment, everything was almost like before, calm, natural, as if all those grievances could dissolve in a conversation about the future. When she left, I stood by the window and watched her board the bus. and I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first step towards something new. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet, as if the house was afraid to disturb this fragile calm, but then, as always, it all started again. First, my parents arrived, they knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, and loudly talked to each other right on the porch. "Catherine, this is ridiculous." Mom shouted, "We're family. You can't just cut us out of your life over one sentence." I stood in the kitchen, holding my coffee mug, and listened to her voice grow more insistent. I didn't answer. "You're being unreasonable," Dad added, banging his fist on the door. I took a sip of coffee, went to the window, and silently watched them leave, slowly, with the same expressions they used to wear when they returned home from church, offended, but certain they were right. The next day, Kelly and Mark arrived. I immediately recognized the sound of her car, that irritatingly loud screech of brakes, as if even the car was trying to assert its superiority. Kelly knocked on the door. "You're crazy, Catherine," she screamed, "this is insane. You're destroying our family." I turned on the TV and turned up the volume to drown out her voice, which was chilling me to the bone. Let her scream, let her rant into the void. I sat in the chair and watched someone baking an apple pie on the screen, and thought that perhaps there comes a time in every woman's life when she just needs to stop listening. They came a few more times, my parents, Kelly, even Mark tried to start a conversation once, standing at the gate, but I didn't open the door again, and that's when I realized, as long as I lived in this house, I wouldn't have peace. They knew where I lived, they could show up at any minute, and my life was becoming a siege again. I had to leave. I called a realtor named Tom, the same one who had once helped my ex-husband and me sell a rental property. I explained that I wanted to sell my current house and buy something smaller. "I need a nice apartment," I said, "nothing fancy, but comfortable and bright, and most importantly, it should all be quiet. I don't want my family to find out." Tom listened and said, "I'll arrange everything, Catherine." Within 2 weeks, he found me the perfect place, a small but cozy apartment in a different neighborhood. It had everything I needed: 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, soft natural light that fell in stripes across the floor, as if the house itself knew how to embrace me. We closed quickly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting a new life. I began packing furtively, little by little, as if I was afraid even the walls of my old house might whisper my plans. Every evening after work, I opened the closets and pulled out a box at a time, a few books, a few picture frames, kitchen utensils, everything that made up my home, my life, and yet no longer belonged to me. I hid the boxes in the trunk of my car, drove them to a rental storage facility on the other side of town, and returned as if nothing had happened. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not Kelly, not even Emma, where I was going. This time, I needed space just for myself, without their questions, accusations, or drama. When everything was ready, I hired movers and moved out in a single day. The house was left with silence, peeling walls, the faint smell of coffee that always lingered in the kitchen, and my reflection in the hallway mirror. Tired, but having finally decided on something truly important, I left the keys on the table and closed the door. This house was no longer mine. The new apartment was smaller, but bright and cozy, with large windows and quiet neighbors. It cost less than the house, and the difference went back into my savings account. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had not only freedom but also financial freedom. I could breathe freely, without the worry of someone coming and demanding, cajoling, or judging me. 2 weeks after moving in, I received a message from an unknown number. "We came to your house and found out you sold it. Where are you living now? We need to know where you are." It was Kelly. I stared at my phone, feeling irritation rise up my spine like a hot wave. "We need to know, not I miss you, not I'm sorry, not are you okay?" Just a demand. As if I had to report back, I didn't reply. I simply deleted the message and turned off the notifications. A week later, I received a letter from my parents, a real letter, paper, with their neat, same handwriting, as if we were still living in the 90s. They wrote that I was acting crazy, that I had abandoned my family, that they were ashamed of me. At the end, it read, "If anything happens to you, don't call us for help. We won't take you back after what you've done." I read it twice, then I folded the letter, tore it in half, and threw it away. If that's really how they thought of me, let them. live with it, I wasn't going to be their lifeline anymore. After that, I didn't speak to any of them, not my mom, not my dad, not Kelly, not Mark, only Emma stayed in touch. Sometimes she'd call, sometimes she'd send short messages like, "Hey, Aunt Catherine, how are you?" Or, "Can I meet you for coffee?" We'd meet at a small cafe downtown that always smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. I never told her where I lived, not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't want her to have to choose between me and her parents. A few weeks after I moved in, Emma turned 15, we met at our usual coffee shop, and I handed her a card and a small gift card. "It's for $500, I said. Emma opened it, and her eyes widened, as if I'd handed her a ticket to the future. "This is for you," I added. "Spend it on something meaningful." She squeezed the card in her palm and smiled. "I'll save it for my laptop," she said. "For college," I laughed. "That's smart, I'm proud of you." Emma looked down at her drink. "Things are pretty tough at home right now," she admitted quietly. "Mom had to take a second job, and Dad is working overtime. They barely make it to pay the mortgage and insurance." I nodded. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, and though my words sounded sincere, inside I felt only a slight weariness, not the pain or compassion I once felt. "They talk about you all the time," Emma continued, "that you were supposed to help them, and now they have to cope on their own." I chuckled and leaned back in my chair. "I've been helping them for years, Emma. I gave your mom $40,000 for the house, I paid for your braces, I bought your brother a computer, I helped your grandparents with their roof, and then I heard they wished I'd been in an accident, so now they can help themselves." Emma nodded silently. "I understand," she said quietly. "I really do." We finished our coffee, talked a little more about school, and when she left, I caught myself thinking I no longer felt guilty. There was only peace, like warm water after a long winter. 6 months passed, I settled into my new life. In the mornings, I strolled along the embankment with a cup of coffee and listened to the city slowly awaken. Twice a week, I volunteered at a food bank, distributing food to those who couldn't afford even the basics. On Wednesdays, I took art classes at the local center, and, standing in front of my easel, for the first time in years, I felt like I was creating something not for others, but for myself. In the spring, I allowed myself a short trip. 3 days in Vancouver, where I simply wandered along the waterfront, looked at the mountains, and thought that life can be easy when you stop dragging everyone down with you who doesn't want to walk beside you. I was happy, genuinely happy, no big words, no theatrics, just happy to be alone, doing what I wanted, and not looking back. One evening, I got a call from a charity I'd worked with for many years. A soft-spoken woman said they were organizing a fundraiser for homeless families and asked if I'd like to help. "Actually," I replied, "I'd like to make a donation." "What kind?" she asked, and without thinking, I said, $100,000. There was silence on the other end, then she said quietly, "That's incredibly generous, Catherine, are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. I was planning on giving Kelly $100,000 for her 40th birthday next year. I wanted it to be a surprise, but now I've decided it's better to give it to someone who will truly appreciate it. The next day, I transferred the money. It was all done quietly, without the pomp and circumstance, without the words of gratitude that usually accompany such gestures. A couple of hours later, an email from the foundation arrived in my inbox, polite, formal, but with something human, something warm. They wrote that the money would help several dozen families, paying for temporary housing, medicine, and hot meals. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, reading this letter, and felt a strange calm, as if I'd closed the final page of some long, exhausting chapter, in which for too long I'd been the heroine of someone else's story. A year had passed since I moved into my own apartment, a whole year without calls, reproaches, or endless demands. I'd built a life that belonged solely to me, without dividing it into for them and for me. I woke up when I wanted, ate what I liked, could spend the day in a robe, reading books and sipping coffee, and no one looked at me with disapproval, no one called me unreasonable or selfish, no one showed up at my door demanding anything, as if I still owed them something. I continued volunteering at the food bank. It became a kind of quiet therapy for me. The people who came there didn't complain or appeal to their conscience, they simply expressed gratitude when they received a bag of groceries, and there was more humanity in their eyes than I'd seen in my family in the last 10 years. I joined the library book club. Every Wednesday, we'd gather around a large wooden table, arguing about characters and endings. laughing as we discussed who would be the first to dump that Mr. Darcy. I even started doing yoga. And even though I couldn't hold tree pose for more than 3 seconds, each session brought me a sense of inner balance that I sorely lacked. I made new friends, women around my age, with whom I could talk about everything except money and my past. They didn't care how much I earned or who I'd given what to. They knew me not as the generous Catherine who saves everyone, but simply as Catherine, a woman who loved books, coffee, and the morning light coming through the window. Emma and I still met for coffee every few weeks. She had grown, stretched, more serious, more careful with her words, but there was still that same softness in her gaze. She talked about school, her future plans, how she was considering going to college to study psychology. I listened and rejoiced, not because I saw her as part of the family, but because I saw in her an independent, honest soul. Emma never asked me for money, and I appreciated that. Sometimes I bought her a book or helped her with little things, but she never expected it, and that's what made our meetings so easy. One day, she told me that Tyler had asked about me. He wanted to know why you never came anymore, she said, taking a sip from her cup. And what did you tell him? I asked. Emma folded her arms, thoughtful. I told him the truth, that Mom said something horrible about you at the barbecue, and you decided you didn't want to be around people who treated you that way. I nodded. And how did he react? He said he felt terrible, that he just laughed because everyone was laughing. He didn't realize it was truly painful. He's still young, I said, feeling a strange warmth inside. He probably just didn't know what words were like that cut, even when spoken in jest. Do you think you'll ever forgive them? She asked quietly. I looked out the window. The first leaves were falling there, softly, soundlessly, as if autumn was trying not to disturb anyone. I don't know, I answered, maybe someday, but forgiveness doesn't mean I'll let them back into my life. Those are different things. Emma nodded. I understand, I guess. Then she told me things were going badly for Kelly and Mark, that Kelly worked 2 jobs, came home late, and complained about being tired all the time, that Mark took any overtime he could to pay the mortgage, that they had to give up cable TV, cut back on almost everything, that Mom sometimes sat and cried when she thought about how to pay the insurance. I listened, trying to detect any feeling, pity, compassion, anger, anything, but inside, there was emptiness. Maybe a little sadness, maybe a little regret that all of this was their choice, but they made it themselves. For years, I was their ATM, their emotional shoulder, their safety net, and then I learned they laughed, wishing I were gone. Let them deal with the consequences themselves. About 6 months after I received the first letter from my parents, a second one arrived. They wrote that I had disappointed them, that they had raised me better, that I should be ashamed of myself for abandoning my family at a difficult time. I didn't even finish reading it, I simply deleted it, like spam. Then I learned from acquaintances that they were complaining about me to all their friends. They said I'd gone crazy, broken up with them for no reason, become cold and heartless. I just chuckled. People always tell the story where they're the victim. It didn't bother me anymore. Those who really mattered knew the truth. 18 months had passed since I moved out when I received a letter from Kelly. It was long, written in her sprawling handwriting, the one I'd once admired when we were girls and wrote notes to each other. She must have somehow found out my address, maybe through Emma, although I doubt she would have given it away on purpose. Kelly wrote that she was sorry, that the joke at the barbecue was terrible, that she hadn't meant it that way, that she missed me and wanted to make things right. I almost believed it until I got halfway through the letter, where it began. We're going through a really tough time right now, we're barely coping, the kids are growing up, they need things for school, Mark's working non-stop, I hope you'll understand and help us out a little. I finished reading, folded the piece of paper, and tossed it in the trash. Even her apology turned out to be a request for money. 2 years had passed since I overheard that conversation at the barbecue, and one evening, sitting in my apartment with a glass of wine and the radio turned low, I suddenly realized something simple but stunning. I'm happy, not normal, not tolerable, not better than before, but truly, calmly, and deeply happy. It was like after a long storm, when the wind finally dies down, and all you hear is the rain dripping from a roof somewhere, and for the first time in a long time, you're not afraid. My life became as calm as a morning lake, no storms, but with the sun reflected in every drop. I had friends who called not because they needed anything, but because they wanted to hear my laughter. I had activities that filled my days with meaning, not because they were supposed to compensate for something, but simply because they brought me joy. I had enough money to live peacefully, without worry or excess, and I could spend it on what really mattered. I no longer needed a family that saw me not as a person, but as a wallet, and, as bitter as it sounded, I understood that they never needed me either, except perhaps for the next bank transfer. Sometimes I thought about my ex-husband. We had divorced long ago, but we had managed to maintain respect, a rare, fragile feeling that rarely survives divorce. Every year he sent me a Christmas card, with kind words, a joke, sometimes a photo of his dog. I responded in kind, and we both knew it wasn't about nostalgia, but about the human warmth that had once existed between us. He knew nothing about my family drama. I didn't want to tell him why. Some wounds are best left untouched when they finally stop hurting, but sometimes I thought, if my family had treated me with even half the kindness with which he and I parted, everything might have been different. Emma was 18 when she graduated from high school. I sat in the audience, surrounded by parents and relatives, listening to the thunderous applause of the graduates. Kelly and Mark were there too. I saw them across the hall. We didn't speak, didn't even make eye contact. It was like being at a play where you're no longer an actress but simply a spectator, and can finally watch calmly, without getting caught up in the drama. After the ceremony, I met Emma on the street. She was beaming, holding her diploma, her hair spilling over her shoulders, her eyes sparkling with tears and happiness. I pulled a card out of my bag, tucked a check for $5,000 into it, and handed it to her. "Take it," I said, "spend it on books, a computer, or just something that will make your life a little easier." She looked at me wide-eyed, like she used to when we were kids, and unexpectedly hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Aunt Catherine," she whispered, "you were kind to me even when I didn't deserve it." I smiled. "You apologized, and you meant it, that's what's important." In the fall, Emma left for college. Occasionally she called to tell me about her new friends, about her roommate who loved to sing loudly in the shower, about the professor who made me read 3 books a week, and every time I heard her voice, I felt pride, quiet, warm, maternal. Even though I wasn't her mother, she'd grown up, she'd chosen a different path, and perhaps, somewhere deep down, I knew, I had too. My life moved on, steadily, confidently. I did charity work, helping those in genuine need. I traveled again, not to escape, but to see the world. I went to the coast, listened to the sound of the ocean, and every time the wind hit my face, I felt like I was breathing freely. I spent evenings with friends, with those who laughed with me, not at me. 3 years had passed since that ill-fated barbecue, and I could say quite honestly, I didn't miss my family, not my parents, not Kelly, not Mark. The only person I had a connection with was Emma, and that was enough for me. I realized something simple but important: family isn't just blood, it's respect, kindness, and love, even when no one's looking. It's not about debt, not about money, not about blackmailing with guilt. When people show you who they really are, don't try to convince them otherwise, just trust. My family showed me that they didn't value me or what I did, and I stopped valuing them. And, a strange, almost bold admission, I've never been happier. Sometimes, though, I remember the $40,000 that Kelly once gave me, money that no one ever gave me back, and no one ever intended to. Sometimes it pricks inside, like an old scar. But then I think about the $100,000 I gave to the foundation, money that actually helped people, families who knew the value of gratitude, who didn't pretend, didn't manipulate, but simply accepted help with an open heart. And then it becomes quiet inside, as if everything fell into place. Now I'm 48, I have health, a home, books, friends, and, most importantly, peace. I have myself. I don't wait for calls, I don't seek approval, I don't look back on the past. I'm finally living my life, without fear, without other people's expectations. And, God, how wonderful it is to not need those who once wished you dead.